in our country.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Collective show. We have a very special show this evening for you with some dear friends from the United States, from Los Angeles, Alise and Nicole. Welcome.
Thanks. Hey, Rick. Good to be here.
It's really great to connect with you. I know that things in the world seem a little bit upended right now, especially in your hometown. How are you? How are you right now? Because I can just imagine how difficult it must be navigating through it.
I think the last 3 days have been enormously difficult for all of us. It's a very heavy time. Just to keep from crying, it really is the challenge because of what's happening in our city and in our country. There's just so much turmoil and hatred, and it's being instigated. And it's just devastating. And our children, we're in lockdown right now, so children are home, they're in front of TV sets, and it's impacting every citizen in our country in one way or another.
Nicole, you mentioned that Evergreen is really at the in the center of a space that was caught up in the rioting. How's that been for you?
Yeah, it's luckily not in a commercial center exactly, but it's in the city of Santa Monica, which the second day was quite a big day of looting. So it's really, we have a lot of families that live there, and it's affecting those families. The director of the school knows a family who owned a music center where they have a whole store of instruments that they give out to children who can't afford instruments in schools, and the neighbors all came and tried to protect the store, but they were taken. All those instruments were stolen. So we haven't, because of COVID and the weekend and it all happening, we haven't been able to touch into all the families' lives that it affects. And then not to just mention the heartbreak of the previous week and the killings and of our families of color and how that impacts them and all of us. So it's a lot to hold, and it's very heartbreaking and intense right now. We may hear sirens and helicopters as we speak today in the background.
So we've kind of collectively as a globe gone through this trauma, and I know our educators here at home have grappled with how to respond, how to keep community alive, and how to keep connection with children, and we've been pivoting towards technology, and I assume you have faced similar challenges over the last few weeks prior to all the grief that's going on now. How have you responded? How have you found that space?
I mean, working technologically with children.
Yeah, and what have you guys been doing?
Well, initially just feeling terribly resistant to it because I never wanted to work with preschool children over Zoom, but eventually, we got into it, and we've done a whole variety of things, from pre-recorded content to morning meetings to, for me, what's been most interesting is doing one-on-one, like Zoom with children. And what's been really fascinating about that is to see, I've never in my teaching career had a time where all children were experiencing something at the same time and with the same narrative, and then to watch how their play shifts. So we immediately started, we were kind of doing play-based sessions, sort of put the computer on the floor, have the toys there, and you started to see children playing out good guy, bad guy narratives where everybody's hiding away for the first time, hiding from the bad guys hiding. And one kid said to me, "Oh, we're all hiding from the bad guys. It's not too bad in here, but we're hiding," and another girl used her My Little Ponies to explain social distancing. And so it's been really, in some way, fascinating to watch and to really see how children interpret the world through play. Like, we've known that for a long time, but to see all of the children in the school experience the same thing at the same time, and then it to immediately show up in their play has been really fascinating.
your role, maybe just give us a little bit of a context of your role before we go into too deep, and at least we'll do the same with just give it context to our audience. What is your role within the Evergreen Community School, and maybe tell us a little bit about Evergreen and where that's come from.
Well, Alise, do you want to talk about Evergreen and where it came from, since it was birthed from you, and then I'll talk about my role?
Sounds like a much better way to do it.
Sure. So Evergreen was born, I think, 36 years, no, more than that, maybe 38 years ago. Evergreen started. And I had to laugh, Rick, because on the questions that you sent me to ponder, there's a question that says, what was your vision when you set up Evergreen? And I just laughed out loud when I read that, because I was probably in my late 20s. First of all, I can't remember what I had for breakfast, let alone what my vision was 38 years ago. But,
right.
But I'm not sure that whatever that vision was is really what really happened anyway, or how clear that vision was. And that's, I think that's been, in some ways, it's been the beauty of Evergreen, because it was opened, it started really as a very blank slate. There were, I think it was 7 children, myself, and one other person whose name was also Alise. So it was Alise, and these 7 kids. And it could be anything. It really could have been anything. And it just, over the years, it evolved and grew. And eventually we started in a church, in an Episcopal church in Beverly Hills. And eventually we were just a little bit too loud and rambunctious, I think, for the church. And they asked us to leave, which was a blessing in disguise. We left, and we were part of the church back then. So we left the church and became an independent nonprofit in Santa Monica, where we are today. And so I've been the director during that entire time.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Nicole, your role.
And I joined the Evergreen 13, this is my 13th year, 13 years ago, as a teacher, a young teacher, and with not quite enough training, but a ton of passion. And Alise took a chance on me, and I'm still there. And I was in the classroom for 8 years, I think. I took 1 year off and wrote a book about education for Patagonia. And then when Alise was transitioning out as director, and Katie, was also a teacher there, took over as director, I came back as pedagogista, which Alise, the force that she is, sort of did both roles. And we need 2 people to replace a one Alise. So I came back, and so I work with teachers on pedagogy and on their work, and I'm sure we'll get into all of the work is emergent from the children. And so we're doing a lot of video analysis, and so I just support teachers in that role, as well as working with children alongside them.
Yeah, that does bring up a lot of interesting questions for me. I think just the idea for many that there's a pedagogista, which correct me if I'm wrong, it's possibly, is it an Italian term, or is it a term that's kind of been adopted from some of the educators from Reggio? But the role, from what I understand, is to really focus how teachers and community think together, and possibly plan forward and backwards and reflect. For many, it could be quite a new idea that there's someone that cares so deeply about pedagogy within the early learning context. So help us understand how that works, and what kind of context do you work with teachers?
Well, first of all, I just have the best job ever. Like, that's the secret. Every day I'm like, really? Someone actually is letting me do this job. Like, I kind of get to do all the best parts of education, and not as many of the not so fun parts. So I guess the secret's out now that I'm sharing it with you and all of your viewers. But it is just wonderful. I mean, I go in every morning, and I have a schedule, and I work during our work period where we're running our groups and things. I work alongside with teachers. Sometimes I run my own work as well. And then when that period's over, I'm doing, working with the teachers on their documentation, editing, thinking with them. I'm doing research for the school, setting up professional development, and then we're lucky to have some hours in the afternoon where we have meetings. I have a meeting every day with teaching teams, but also every day with individual teachers, and they bring their work and we go through it. And then I'm also building bridges between the different classrooms about what's going on, and weaving themes. And we also do kind of research over a period of time on a topic. So for a couple of years, we did research on the concept of belonging, which led us into relational thinking. And so providing teachers with resources, readings, and those kind of things. And weaving those threads. And it's just, I just really naturally love philosophy and thinking, and I love children and play. And it's kind of those two things wed into one. And children are naturally philosophic thinkers. They just bring it. And so it's my job. They bring it and I get to respond.
Alise, so you've obviously set up the structure of, and even the culture of that school, and have prioritized thinking as a way of learning and listening as a way of being. Why are those important, and how did you come to it? Was this something that was innately in you, that you felt that this is how teaching should happen, or were you inspired along the way?
First, I want to say that Evergreen wasn't always this way in terms of a structure. We had to work hard to get this structure. So way back, going back 35 years, we had a morning program and an afternoon program. So we had morning teachers and afternoon teachers, and they were never together and they couldn't talk. And when we decided that we were going to really get serious about reflection, we made some hard decisions. And one of those decisions was we were going to raise tuition and have everybody there at the same time, which meant fewer children. And it was a very unpopular decision, as you can imagine. When I sent that, I remember the day that I sent that letter out to parents thinking, oh my gosh, they're gonna lynch me. Like, I'm raising tuition and offering them less. But we knew we needed to be together as a community of teachers in order to be serious about the work we were doing. And that if we couldn't come together at the end of the day, that this was never going to work. You can't have teachers having this shift and that shift, and that's not a community. And our ability to reflect is only as strong as the group. And if the group's not together, it doesn't happen. So we made that shift many, many years ago. And that was, I think, that was a really pivotal point for us. And, I do want to talk a little bit about my thinking and relationship with Reggio, but here's where Reggio was really helpful. So going back to this, and I'm going back 30 years now. Right. Or 28, I think it was 28 years ago. The 100 Languages of Children had just been published that year. And what happened was I was invited to a bootleg copy of A Portrait of a Lion. Have you seen that? I don't even know if they show it anymore. It's archaic. But this was a bootleg copy. So it's a Reggio project that happened. And it was scratchy, and it was in black and white, and you could hardly make out the words, but we didn't speak Italian anyway, so it didn't matter. But a professor of mine got a hold of this bootleg copy and invited a small group of students to her apartment to watch it. And that was a really interesting moment for us. And so soon after that, 100 Languages of Children was published, the first edition. And this wasn't an act of brilliance. It only turned out to be brilliant after the fact. It wasn't forethought brilliant, but we decided that we were going to do a book study and read this book together as a staff. But what I did is I invited the parents to read it with us.
Right.
But what happened was the parents had more time on their hands than we had. So they were just gobbling it up, and we were rushing to keep up. And A, we didn't have a lot of time, and B, we didn't know how to do it. And the parents are going, yeah, do it, do it. And we're going, oh, gee, like, easy for you to say, but we're not really sure how to do this. But because the parents were so on board from the very start, it did push us along. Like, there was no going back for us. We couldn't say, sorry, we were only kidding, stop reading. So we had to move forward in a pretty serious way. We were forced into it. So that was, in the end, it turned out to be a very brilliant maneuver. And it did take us to that next step.
You say you said something really interesting. Unless you reflect as a group, reflection doesn't really happen at all. As in, like, you can't move forward together, right? If one individual is kind of thinking this way and another one is thinking that way and reflecting, and there's no unified way. And I think so many of our centers that I've observed are shift work, you know, shifts starting 7:30, other one 9, and finishing at different spaces. And it seems that there's a real difficulty trying to bring that unity of reflection together. Nicole, how do you deal with that?
Well, I'm lucky that I landed in Alise's lap in my mid-20s. So I really kind of grew up in the culture of thinking together. But, you know, we just meet regularly. And I think the major thing is that we watch video of children in our teaching together every week. And we have this process of video analysis where at any time someone can say, pause, and we stop and we talk. And one of the things I really love is that we don't try to stay in like early childhood educator mode when we talk about it. We really try to bring our whole self to the table. All of the things we're reading, all of the people that we are, our feelings, our thoughts, and we let ourselves roll and we let ourselves ramble and we go down tangents. And some teachers, when they're new, it drives them crazy. But what it does is we are trying to build culture together. We're trying to build understandings together, and we're trying to build those understandings not in separation from the rest of the world, not as isolated educators, but as human beings and as people who are educating whole human beings. So it's sometimes slow, sometimes fast. You know, sometimes you watch a piece of video and like it just, you're like, oh my God, look at that thing that we didn't do, or look at that thing we did. That is the way we want to move forward, and we write it up and everybody understands it. And sometimes it's like you're chewing on something for a long time. I remember we did a year of research on like how notions of ownership affect community life. And we went around and around for months around the same discussions until we finally came to a consensus about like how we wanted to, what our school, how we wanted to relate to inclusion and exclusion. So it takes time and a flexibility of thinking and a willingness to not put boxes around anything in particular, and a lot of systems to keep you going so that you don't get stuck.
The thing is, Rick, if you're a single teacher and you've had this experience with a group of children or with a child, and you go back into your classroom and you're reflecting alone, it's already being filtered through your lens, and your lens is what it is. So it's pretty limited how far you can go with that. But when you put 10 intelligent people around a table together and they each have their own lens and they're looking at this experience, not from the story you're telling them, because that's already subjective, but they're seeing the video of what happened. This is why we do video analysis every single day. When you look at that video together and you have 10 perspectives around that table coming from these really different places and seeing the gems in that moment differently, that's when it just opens up. And I think, you know, we always talk at Evergreen about the jewel in the box. You know, the children present you with this like box that's all wrapped up with glitter and bows and, you know, all the things that children like. But if you can dig deep into that box, there's some kernel in there. And it's the job of the teacher to find, where is it? You know, let me dig deeper. And so when we think about our small group work at Evergreen, it's sort of like the group is going along and you're doing this work, like maybe you're, I don't know, think of a group, Nicole, you're building an ATM machine or, you know, whatever it is.
There you go.
And you're moving along and there, you know, you're sort of operating on the surface, and then every once in a while this something really deep is percolating below the surface and it starts percolating up. And so you make way for it. And then all of a sudden there's this very deep philosophical discussion that's going on, and then it recedes and you go on with and then something else percolates to the surface. But finding that little gem that's going to percolate to the surface, is really difficult to do by yourself. And that almost always happens in a group context when teachers are together thinking together.
That is really profound. I don't think video analysis is really something that's normalized in our culture, and I'm not sure if you experience the same. And so you've created a culture where Nicole, do you go and put like the phones or video cameras to record certain discussions, or is that something that the teachers have just come to be, know as a way of being, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's an expectation of teachers, and there's there's kind of particular times of day where you're like, yeah, I'm going to record this. Like our reflection meeting gets recorded every day. And it's when there's 3 teachers in a classroom, one knows they're going to grab the camera and record it, because that's a really important time for our
reflection meeting for children. She's talking about reflection meetings for
children, right?
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah.
So I'm just going to go slow here. So help us understand reflection
please.
meetings, because
yeah,
we are used to group times, mat times, that kind of thing. Reflection meeting is probably not language that's heard much. So talk to us about what happens in those.
Reflection meeting is
everything.
I'll start, and then you can fill in all the gaps. So it happens every day after a period of work time where people are working in separate groups or in different areas of the classroom, and it's we don't know what the meeting will be about at any given day, but all the teachers are looking for questions that have come up as a result of the children's work and are based on the children's work. And they're really, they can really be diverse kinds of questions. Like it could be, there was a group of students this year looking at why scooters go fast down hills and how scooters go fast and the physics of that. And so it might be why is that happening? Or it could be, there was another group I remember a few years ago that was trying to make a book of the bugs at Evergreen, and this is one of those moments Alise is talking about where the jewel opens up, and they had been talking about facts and arguing about facts. And then in my work with the teacher, I said, well, what is a fact, and who decides what's true about it? Because they were fighting over whether aphids were green or black, and it turns out they're both green and black. And so it led to this question of how do we know it's true? And it was this 30-minute reflection meeting where at the end of it, one of the kids said, maybe nobody can ever know what's true. It's just like really incredible dissection of truth. And so, yeah, anything from physics or to even deciding the rules of a classroom. How long can a building stay up, and letting them have decision-making processes in the classroom so that they can create the rules of their community within reason. And so that meeting is really central to the building of community amongst the teachers and the children, in the same way that our video analysis is amongst.
I was just thinking when you were talking, Nicole, that it's kind of like the pedagogy of ambiguity is what it's. That's what reflection meeting is. It's the pedagogy of ambiguity, because there's no right or wrong answer. At a reflection meeting, there are just a lot of ideas on the table. There's your perspective and my perspective and somebody else's perspective. And we're not trying to get at the truth of anything. We're not trying to get at the truth. We're not looking for the right answer. What we're doing is we're helping children to be comfortable with the fact that there are all these perspectives, that there aren't single truths, that there are ideas, that ideas are just ideas, and they're good to have and good to share. And that we can be comfortable with the fact that you have a different idea than I have. And for us, and this is one of the things about Evergreen that I just love so much, if children can be comfortable with that ambiguity and with all the nuances and complexities of all of these ambiguities, isn't that really what World Peace is about? Being comfortable with all these perspectives and not feeling like you hold the single truth. And so reflection meeting is a place where children can practice being in that middle ground where the truth isn't so known, or maybe it's not so defined.
And not attaching their identity to their ideas so much, right? And if we have a little lens into what's happening globally, with fractions, this seems to be at the core of what's breaking us apart, is that we have to attach our identity to single concepts or ideas rather than be able to hold the polarities within the grasp of our understanding.
And we even realized some years ago that if we say, oh, that reminds me of Alise's idea when she said in reflection meeting, that we'll see the children start to grab onto identity and ideas. So we actually build that link between identity and ideas. But if I say, oh, well, there was this one idea like this, and then there was this other idea, it becomes the ideas become more central, and Alise may disagree with her own idea in 5 minutes, and that's okay. And that happens every single day. Every single day you're asked to also consider someone else's perspective and take that on and shift and shift and shift over and over again.
This is so powerful, because really what you're laying down, I mean, there's so much in this. One is that deep listening to each other, which allows everyone space to have a voice. That is such a central way of being together, and I think that's beautiful. Everyone has the right to share their ideas and contribute in that space, and I think that's really beautiful. But in the same space, what you're talking about is essentially you're building the foundation for self-awareness and
other awareness,
and others' awareness. And I kind of define self-awareness in a way as knowing that you are not your thoughts and your beliefs, that those things are ever changing. They are part of you, but that's not the core of who you are. You don't have to identify with that. And so it's a very powerful process that you guys are undertaking, just in that small way of being within a reflective meeting.
Yeah. It's also connected to this idea that I love, that that there's this idea that like thinking happens in your own mind, in your own self, separate from the world, which is so problematic in the culture. But actually thinking is happening in relationship to objects, in relationship to discourse. It's happening inside and outside of us. So it's like we're building this culture that thinking is relational. It happens together, and it's built together, and it's it's as a result of us being together, which is such a different model than most, when you look at individualized testing, individualized work, like that's based on the idea that we think as an individual and that our merit is based on what we can do inside of our own mind. And this gives the children this is, no, actually, how do we think as a community? Because that is how we do it. We are always in contact with the world around us. It's always informing us. Even when we're alone, we are with the natural environment, we're with our technology, and that's always playing into how we see, how we think, how we feel in the world.
So we have to, go for it, Alise.
I was just going to say that I think that education has been built on a system where the teacher is trying to elicit from children correct answers all the time. And even, I don't think teachers are so aware of how often they do that, even just by saying, that's right, as if the right answer is the only thing that matters.
Or even just like, oh, yes, like just a change of tone, subtleties, when you get an answer that you like.
Right. Oh.
First, like, oh yeah, that's a good one.
Let's focus on that one.
I mean, we all do that, so subconsciously.
Yeah. So it takes a lot of, I think, awareness as a teacher to like pedal that back and not do that, and really to truly be open to all of these answers that children have, all of these theories that they have.
I think one of the main shifts in my understanding of pedagogy came when I visited some schools over in Melbourne in Australia. It was on a network tour that the Reggio Alliance put on here, and we visited a school, and within the school they had a deep research school-wide that was based on the Rene Descartes, I think I said that wrong, but it's okay. It's quote that I think, therefore I am. Which is it's a fascinating provocation to kind of like have out there. And what I observed throughout the documentation and throughout what they were doing was that they were super comfortable allowing children to live in complex ideas, like what is thinking, what color, what sound comes from thinking, ideas where there definitely is no right or wrong answer. And those gems that you talked about came through when they deeply listened. And so I think that was a fundamental shift for me. Like, oh, I can see how living in that ambiguity that you talked about, the mystery, or just that space of where you suspend your disbelief and allow children's almost intuitive senses to start formulating working theories of the world. Magic happens, absolute magic happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And children are brilliant because they're learning the culture. So they reflect it back really, if you learn to understand them, because they don't speak, they speak metaphorically, they speak not in ways that we lose some as an adult. So it takes some time to learn. But when you do, they're just showing you, hey, here's who we see who you are. We see you. This is what we see you as, in a way that adults never can. And they do that in beautiful ways when they play family, and when they talk about friendship, when they talk about nature, and they do it in, ways that are painful. Like I remember a 3-year-old once, we had pretend cell phones, the old cell phones back when it was Blackberries. And whenever a friend was getting in a conflict with her, she'd go pick it up and pretend not to listen and text, right? Like, or even, they know from the baby doll tests, if you've heard about that children understand the racial hierarchy from age 3. And so they'll show us where we're beautiful, and they'll show us where we're really failing and we're really not succeeding. And it's one of the things I love about working with them, is that they tell us who we are in a way that nobody else in the culture can. Like, it's the gift of childhood to show the culture back what it is by the very fact that they're just learning it. And so then they're not, they give it right back to you.
And then the other gift of childhood, to build on that, Nicole, is this idea of how children are they have the freedom to be innovative in a way that adults don't. We're so bound by what we know, by the facts that constrain our thinking. The children, because they're not so wedded to the facts, can think outside those bounds. And therefore, they have really the sharpest minds on the planet, because they can go places we can't go. And that's, ask any inventor, artist, innovator, that's what it takes.
It reminds me of something I just read this week again, which a test designed to, I suppose, bring out creative geniuses within the NASA workforce. And the same test, which was given to children 3, 5, and then again at 10 and 15, at 5 years old, 98% of them came out as divergent thinking geniuses. And this was in I think early 70s. So again, we hope, but we're skeptical that education has changed. But and then the crazy thing is, they get to 10 years old and it's dropped to like 60%, and then in adulthood it's down to something like less than 5% of the population. And how we have messed that up.
Well, we teach children that it's not okay to have the wrong answer, that you need to think in conventional ways. And so they do.
They sure do. So the work that you've done, so Alise, just touching base a little bit on your journey since Evergreen, I know the Pedagogical Institute of Los Angeles has been something that's how I originally connected to you, is seeing the work that you were created there. And we'll go into that story a little bit later on, because it was just such a joy meeting you in February, just before the world turned upside down. We were very, very grateful for that. Tell us, you mentioned a trip to Sweden, I think, that really inspired you and helped you to think through something. Came back to LA. What happened in Sweden? what was the journey for you that helped you move?
Nicole, you'll help me out with this. Okay, so we decided that we wanted to go to Sweden because we were really interested in gender play and gender roles, and we were noticing some things at Evergreen that we were having some questions about and confusions. And so we were researching who knows a lot about this. Well, it turns out the Swedes, the Minister of Education, if I'm getting this right, is the same person who's the Minister of Gender Equality.
Mm-hmm.
Gender equality. So they've done a lot of research. So we decided that we would go and we would sit at their feet and really learn. And we invited a group of educators from our community to join us. So there were, 30 some of us. anyway, while we were there, we visited many schools, and some were impressive and some were, fine. But the ones that were the very best were in this municipality, this particular municipality where they had a pedagogical institute. And this was a place where teachers could come, share their documentation with these sage women that, were in their 50s or 60s and had really honed their skills. And these young teachers would come and they would talk together and work together and think together. And we saw the difference in that municipality. We saw a huge difference. And we had been working in schools around the world for quite a while, but maybe a little less so in our own backyard. So that night we were in a restaurant. We actually
hotel cafe.
In a hotel cafe.
In the dark.
They shut it down. They closed it. We were there, so this meeting was very intense. I'll never in my life forget it. They turned off the lights. We were in a corner. They turned off the lights. So we're sitting there in the dark, and it came up that, is it our time? Is this the time now that we should be opening up this dialogue in our own community? Because there's such a disparity in Los Angeles between the haves and the have-nots and the education they receive. Complete disparity. We have the West Side preschools that are fancy like Evergreen, and then we have schools in neighborhoods of color where it's not so ideal. And it's drawn along economic and racial lines very often. So we started having that conversation about, is this the time to do this? And at the time I was still the director of Evergreen. But we went around the table. I love this hour that unfolded. We went around the table one by one, and each person, again, it's like you have to imagine this in a dark restaurant, and we're whispering because we don't want anyone to hear us and just don't know what's going to come of this conversation. But one by one, each teacher weighed in, because we knew that opening an institute was going to be an enormous task, and that we couldn't do it if everyone wasn't on board.
And one thing I love is that I was the most tepid, because I was like, it's gonna be a lot of work, guys. I'm one of the only teachers left. I was like, everybody was like, let's do it. And I was like,
let's do it.
That's great, but we also work full time already, and I'm one of the only teachers left. Working on it.
But we did decide to do it that night. And so everyone went back to their hotel room. I stayed up all night talking to realtors in the United States. And by the time I got off the plane, I had set up several appointments to look at sites. The Evergreen Community School Board was very supportive, because of course we didn't have the money to do such a thing. But they gave us some seed money to start this. And so the initial idea was to create a place where educators from all over the city could come together and just have a dialogue about education. And that it shouldn't be this dialogue that we were having as a small community, that circle should open up. And so people were coming on buses at night, and we were doing about 3 or 4 nights a week. We were hosting workshops.
We would cook dinner, we'd make stews, and so there would be dinner for the educators. They're coming right after work.
Lure them in.
Yeah.
Very important.
And it was a beautiful space. It was
so
in this
beautiful
loft with a big ceiling, kind of like this ceiling right up there. You can see it.
Everything Alise touches is beautiful.
I've noticed.
It was a lovely space, and we just made it really beautiful for them. And we had documentation labs and video analysis labs and guest speakers, and speakers that spoke about things like the Navy SEALs. Things that didn't have to do with education. It was really quite extraordinary, but it was also really challenging to keep it going, because we were all working full time, and it was a challenge. But the other thing that happened is that we started feeling like, in spite of our best intentions, the site was still on the West Side, which meant that it was attracting mostly West Side teachers who, in some ways were preaching to the choir.
Right.
And that we still we weren't opening the dialogue as much as we had hoped. So we shut down that site, and we started working with low-income schools right inside the school. We just went in, formed partnerships with teachers and principals, and started working with what we call transitional kindergarten teachers. And so that, the way that looked is we would, they would pack up their classrooms, and we would purchase some really appropriate and beautiful materials, and along with them and their community and volunteers from the broader community, we would spend 3 or 4 days building just a truly beautiful and engaging classroom based on constructivist principles. And then for the next 2 years, we would mentor those teachers weekly, and Nicole is one of our mentors. So the mentors would come in, and you can talk a little bit more about the role of the mentor in all of this, Nicole. Nicole?
Oh, yeah, I'm here. And it's just like, right now?
Now's good.
Yeah, so we would form relationships with the teachers, and we'd come in mostly once a week and work alongside them for a couple
an hour or a couple of hours, or
yeah, it was usually like around 3 or 4 hours by the time we left, like getting there in the morning, checking in, setting things up, working with the children, and then having meetings about what happened afterwards.
So that was one-on-one with teachers and their classroom, so very intensive mentoring.
Yeah, and the students would get to know us. Yeah, students, we'd come in and work alongside the teachers, and they would, we would know the children quite well. And the teachers would also complete a portfolio over the course of the 2 years that we would then go back and forth about and work with, and that kind of thing. And then we would do like other school visits of other places where they might get inspiration, and a couple of different meetings where they would bring video, and we would do video analysis as the whole team in these different teachers in separate schools. And at the end of the year, they present the best parts of their portfolio, and we celebrate together.
Beautiful. What did you learn? Because that seems like a beautiful, intensive process, but also one that would be enormously challenging.
It was.
So I'm curious to know, Nicole, what did you learn as a mentor around effective ways of helping teachers grow?
I learned a lot. I probably still have a lot more to learn. I think it's every teacher is so different, and so it was different in that way. But I learned how much relationship and was important to it, because it's such an ask. Like, we asked, the teachers who did it were so brave, because here they were, they'd been educated in one way, and in many ways we're asking them in a minute to go the opposite direction, and to trust, and then to explain it to their parents, and to sometimes stand up to other educators in the school who were threatened by what was going on, and to stand firm before they even knew how to do what we were asking them to do well. So I learned just about how to help people get through that process, and being there for them emotionally, and caring for the space between us, and at the same time holding them to a high standard. It was this very, it's a really delicate balancing act, because it wasn't, I believe strongly and firmly and in the rights of children to have a different experience than what they're having. And I cared and loved for the teachers, and sometimes they were just
at odds.
I mean, just, it's very disorienting to when we asked them to, from their perspective, to give up a huge amount of control than what they were used to. And in reality, it's not actually a shift. You're still very much we're not asking them for chaos in their classroom, but from where they were coming from to where they were now. So just, this tension between holding them to a high standard and unholding their hearts, and as they went through a very vulnerable process. So
it's an interesting point, because I think that's generally, as teachers, we have been educated in somewhat of a controlling of the environment, control the classroom, control the ways, and it's comfortable because we don't have to enter into that scary space of what could be perceived chaos. How do you, what is the, Alise, actually I have a question for you around the role of the teacher, because I remember sitting with you and you went through the orientation with some of the volunteers that works within the refugee communities, which we'll talk about soon. And you talked there about the role of the teacher, and I thought you were so succinct in being able to kind of like bring almost a fresh perspective of what the role of the teacher is. How do you see that role?
Let me continue with what Nicole was talking about. So, you know, when we talk about what we've learned in the 5 years that we've been working with LAUSD, it's enormous what we've learned, and we've made every mistake you could possibly make in those 5 years trying to figure it out. It's not easy to hold the hand of the teacher, but also hold them to a standard. But I remember the first year I had mentored the first teacher. It was sort of our pilot program, and we were just seeing if it would work. And this was a teacher who had everything pretty locked, buttoned down in her classroom. Children would be at this table and they would do this activity, and then a buzzard would go off and everyone would get up and move to the next table, and these children would move to that table, and this is sort of, they called them rotations. And so when we opened up the classroom and made it this place with really like amazingly engaging materials with a mag wall and dramatic play and all kinds of physical knowledge experiences, and just, you know, they could just use the room in this creative way, she came back and said, this isn't working. My class has never, like, the kids are fighting. They've never fought before. They've never fought. And like, clearly this is for the birds. But of course they were fighting, because they had never been given freedom to have their own thought or to even to interact with each other, because everything was so controlled. And what she didn't understand is that controlling them that much isn't helping them to know how to be in the world. That this is why we have riots here right now in our city. As we're sitting here in our comfortable little houses, there are riots out on the streets right now that are it's breaking our hearts. And it's because of that kind of education, where children couldn't encounter each other because it was so locked down. And this is the very reason I wish I could talk to that teacher tonight and say to her, don't you see that children needed to have that freedom to figure it out at 5, so that at 35 they wouldn't be in the streets fighting, or so that a police officer isn't killing a Black man? You see?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I just
now
can I add one thing onto that? As I was at a protest and a Black Lives Matter rally on Saturday, and they were saying LAUSD, which is our school district, is the largest school district in the country and has the largest school police force of any in the country. There are police officers in the school. And I was talking to someone afterwards, and it is exactly what Alise says, that if you have been, when you're 5, you will sit in a desk and be rotated and not be listened to, and because you still love adults and you still trust them to some extent. But if that is all you get over and over, you will need police officers in your high school, because you will have built no trust with children. You would have built no sense that they have any authority within their own institution, that their voice matters, that these people care about who they are beyond regurgitating what has come back to them. And so we don't need police officers in our schools. We absolutely don't. But it is a result of, and it seems like maybe a leap to make, but after all the years I've been in education, it's just absolutely true that when children from a very young age are given no opportunity to encounter one another, the rage that gets built inside a child over time is just, it's unavoidable.
And inexperience. It's rage, but it's also just inexperience. What you do when you get into a sticky situation with another person. How do you have that experience if you're moving from rotation to rotation and not talking to anybody?
Allowing conflict and allowing opposable views and making space for that as a normal part of the human development and society and community together, which is exactly what we don't do in many of the education. Like, we have an outcome, we want to get them there, and if we're really honest with ourselves, our society has now been built upon a structure where we can't even think differently about school, because it's kind of like it's just so ingrained in the way that we are, and it is a struggle. I think during lockdown, I've had some interesting experiences with my children around, call it maybe the potential for unschooling and being, again, led by their interest and what they love to do. And I know so many children and families who've noted that their children's actually settled a whole lot more just being in this slower rhythm of life where they've been listened to in a family, in a unit. And yeah, I think creating those strong attachments in relationships at school has to be all. It has to be everything. And then allowing children from that space of safety to have opposable views and different knowings.
And you were talking before about the role of the teacher. Part of the role of the teacher is to create a place where children can practice being responsible community members, caring for each other, caring for the materials, and encouraging children to express their ideas and their feelings and wonderings to each other, and to listen and to be heard.
So Alise, my friend Nick and I, we flew to LA and we drove across the border to Mexico in February to visit, which is probably the latest chapter of your life and chapter of the Pedagogical Institute's life. And we were so deeply attracted and impressed by the work that you've done. Few things. One was, and I've got a video, actually I'll see if this will come up, a video of just the spaces that you've created and within the refugee community. Can you guys see that? And this is outside the nest in Tijuana, and there's a refugee asylum on the other side of the road. Is that right, Alise?
Yes. Shelters across the street.
Shelters across the street. And I'd love for you to tell the story of this soon, but we'll just share with this. And already, even in the video, you capture the contrast of what you're creating. Chaos in the streets, and you walk in and there's a space that's calm and full of beauty. And we were fortunate enough to be there when children from those refugee communities were there as well. But there's a few things that, I'll just stop that. There was a few things that stood out for me there, but one being that regardless of the background of children, there is an innate potential and beauty within, and resiliency within what they do. And then the other things were how, surrounded by beauty, the soul grows. Tell us a little bit about that story, and feel free to kind of elaborate the context of how you came to work with the refugee communities.
Yeah, so real quickly, I'll tell that story. My husband and I were on our retirement trip that the Evergreen School Board had sent us on, and we wound up on the island of Lesbos. And really, it was an accident. We were on a street corner. We were trying to navigate this car on this narrow road, and I had jumped out of the car to say, an inch to the right, an inch to the left. It was one of those moments on a country road, and this woman came romping down the stairs, and she said, "Hi," and she looked like she was from Kansas, and she was from Kansas, as it turns out. And so we got into this conversation, and she was there doing relief work. She was one of the people that would go down on the shores at night. They had shifts, and as the rafts are coming in, piled full of people, men, women, children, she would get these people hopefully safely off the rafts and bring them in. So we started talking about that experience, and I asked if I could visit a refugee camp, and she said no, but you can visit the community center where the refugees go during the day. And really, Rick, we went there more as an anthropological experience, just because I'm always up for, a new adventure, no other reason. And we went it was the day that we were leaving the island. I just said to Tom, before we leave this island, we don't know anything about the life of a refugee. We owe it to ourselves to understand that. So we just stopped in this community center, and the first thing that I encountered in walking in was a toddler. And this child was no more than 2.5. He still had that toddler gait of, like the wide gait. And he was carrying a hot cup of coffee as he was walking like this. And he was carrying coffee because it was a place that was built for adults. And a wonderful place that's built for adults. I would never put that place down because they're doing amazing work, but they hadn't yet really thought about the children who were coming there. And so the kids are playing with nails and cigarette lighters in the dirt that they found and just debris. And there was a room. So we wound up making an offer that we would turn that room into a place for children if they had an interest, and that we would return in a couple of months if they wanted us to do that. So came back to the States, we did a whirlwind fundraising campaign, and 2 months later went back and created our first nest. And I was going to show photos of it, but let me just really quickly see if I have them. Well, it's okay. My computer's acting up. I might not even want to try to do that. Yeah, I think I better not. Okay. So we set up the nest there, and it's just a lovely place. And you mentioned beauty. First of all, as we were setting it up, people were coming in saying, "That's really beautiful, but it will never last here." Every single person who walked in said, "You don't know, you don't understand. This can't last here." And I even started believing it myself. But it's been 2 years, and it's still very beautiful. It's a beautiful space. And it's beautiful for a couple of reasons. One thing is, people might think that beauty is frivolous in the life of a refugee. Like, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where does beauty fit into things when you don't even have a home? But all the more reason why the nest needs to be a beautiful space. Because it needs, when you are surrounded with chaos, garbage, trash, just the scene of a refugee camp, to walk into a place like the nest is to humanize you. It's to dignify your existence. And we see the parents walk in and just take a deep breath. It's like they're breathing in the beauty of that space. And everyone needs that. Everyone needs that in their life. So the nest is the place where they can have that. And for the children too, that it's, there's a routine and it's predictable, and there's no visual chaos, there's no fighting. It's the place they can be to heal from a life of displacement. And these children, I was talking to one of our refugee volunteers who's from Syria, and she was telling this story about this boy who came in, this young boy, and he drew a picture of a boat in the middle of the sea. And I was asking her about it, and she said to me, "You don't have to ask that boy what that picture is about." She lived that herself. She got onto a raft with a 2-year-old in the middle of the night, and by the light of the moon and by the grace of God, made it to Greece. But can you imagine, and most of the people that come on that trip can't swim. They're from countries that aren't surrounded by water, and they can't swim. Can you imagine putting your children in a raft in the middle of the night on the sea? And can you imagine for that child? So these children come with all of these experiences, not to mention the drama and trauma of leaving behind everybody you know and love and everything familiar to you. And suddenly you're in this refugee camp where you stand in line to take a shower or stand in line to get a meal, maybe for hours. So the nest is really it's just a haven. It's a place to just feel the peace of the space and to feel dignified. And one of the things that I love so much about that project is, and this evolved like everything else, like it wasn't some great vision that we had. It was something that just, we figured it out as we went. But The initial idea was we were going to set up this nest in Lesbos and leave it to volunteers who come to the community center there to run it. And then very quickly, before we even left, we realized that that was foolhardy, that these children had a lot of traumas, and a constant change of guard was not what they needed, and they didn't, they weren't trained teachers, these volunteers coming and going. So instead, what we did is we formed a coalition of international nesters, and these are people like us from around the world that come and stay for an extended period of time and work with the children, and they can pass off information to one another, so we can at least have a little bit of that consistency, or at least passing of the guard and passing of the torch. But in addition to that, so that's one part of the model, that we have these international nesters that come. But the other part of the model that has been so powerful and a surprise to us is that we train the local people who are living in the shelter, in the refugee camp. We train them to be assistant teachers. And it's a job for them. They come every day, they work all day long. And for them, it's a reason to wake up in the morning, because it gives them something to do while they're just waiting. And that wait is challenging. And the wait can be months and months and months.
Yeah, that's definitely what we noticed in Tijuana, was the local refugee volunteers that were recruited were just beautiful and intelligent, and formed community. And I could see how this was healing. This was completely healing and setting them up. And so in the process of setting something up for children, which is so beautiful, you've also created this healing symbiotic relationship between adults and children as well. And for many, showing them a way of being with children that would never have ever come across.
Yeah. And they talk about how it's affected their parenting, the way they relate to one another at the shelter, the fighting at the shelter between children has calmed down. The children are learning strategies to get along with one another. And these children will wind up in a public school somewhere in the world, whether they're in Europe or in the United States. They're going to wind up probably in a public school, in a kindergarten. And we're hoping, and we believe with all our hearts and souls, that the skills that they gain during their time at the nest will help them to succeed in kindergarten, because they'll know how to navigate sticky situations and how to care for each other, how to be part of a community, and most importantly, how to have a voice, because navigating another culture is really tricky. Most likely it's not your first language, you look different, you're coming from different cultural background, and so suddenly you're in this other culture and you're an outsider. So to have a voice, to have a strong voice, to be the child who raises their hand and says, I have an idea, is not so easy. And so what we're really hoping for these children is that in this space in between, and that's what the nest is, it's a space in between, this place that they've come from and this place that they're going, and they're now in this like limbo space, that this is the space where they can practice those skills of, I have an idea. This is what I think about that. Yeah. And to hear somebody else's idea. If we can give them that, and they go on to kindergarten with that, we've done a lot of good.
Children experience time so differently to adults as well. So, they may only be in that space of the nest for 3 months, but it can deeply and profoundly shape the rest of their existence, really, because that's the way that ideas and memories and positive, I suppose, you got negative trauma, but you've also got these ideas of positive, not positive trauma, but like the opposite of trauma, which are deep ideas that deeply impact our whole way of being. And I see that in the nest. I see that is, regardless of the time they spend there, it's so impactful, so different, such a provocation, that I think it can deeply change the way that they view the world moving forward.
Well, and about trauma, even being able to draw that boat in the middle of the sea at night, just the act of drawing it alone is healing.
Yeah.
A way to begin to let go of the fear of that.
I was at the nest in Lesbos not long after it was opened, and then that that piece about parents stepping into beauty, but also just the dignity of like getting to be the parent you might have imagined you were going to be. Like when you're in that space, you're a parent in a space meant for children. Like it's a place that you might have imagined. Oh, I get to just be a parent here. I'm not a refugee here. I'm just a parent to this child, and we can do parent and child things and play together. And I can get down on the floor with my kid or watch them from afar, watch them interacting, and yeah, getting to shed other labels and just be that parent at that moment was such a beautiful thing to witness.
Because we all, when we're having a baby, we all imagine ourselves to be a great parent. And then circumstances happen that make that really challenging. And I remember watching this woman from Myanmar with her child, and I was thinking that very thing you were saying, Nicole, is that looking at her, I could tell that she had high hopes of being a great mom. But how could she do that in the context of a refugee camp? She had to give up so much. But in the nest, she could reclaim that. How beautiful for her to sit down and just play on the floor with a little stuffed animal with her 2-year-old. Yeah.
We have the World Refugee Day coming up really soon, Alise, and you guys have a pretty exciting project called Voices from Afar.
Yes.
Our community would love to get behind what you're doing and support you. So tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, I'm really excited about this project, Rick. Of course, in this time of COVID, I don't think we would have done this as an online event any other time. And when Lindsay proposed this idea to us, I thought, oh, brother, how are we going to do this? But it's actually quite exciting. So most people have never met a refugee or really spent time getting to know a refugee. And, these are people with lives. They were mechanics, they were this, they have lives, and they bring all of that with them. They're not refugees, they're people with lives. And it's really nice to be reminded about that. So Voices of Afar, we're giving the opportunity for people to tell their story, and not just the sad story, because we know there's a sad story. We know they got onto that boat. We know that they're trying to cross borders and that they've walked far distances. And so we're not really focused, and there's a little bit of telling the backstory where people felt that they wanted to, but we're really focusing on the dreams for the future and how these people imagine life could be for them, and what they're prepared to do to get there.
So how can people connect to that? And how, is it I think my understanding is that it's a video, it's an hour and a half.
It's an hour and a half, and during that hour and a half there will be musical interludes by this amazing musician named Julian Sapariti, whose mother was a Vietnamese refugee, and his songs are all about the refugee experience. It's acoustic guitar and it's very lovely. And then Naomi Nye, who is a wonderful American poet whose father was a Palestinian refugee, will be doing some readings and talking about her experiences and her family's experience. So it's going to be a really full event. It's an hour and a half long. It's on June 20th in the United States at 5 p.m., but that means that it's at
12 p.m.
on the 21st.
I think on the 21st, yeah.
The 21st at 9 in the morning or something like that.
Yes.
It's early in the morning for you. And you go into our Eventbrite site. It's free. It's free of charge. Just sign up. You won't be able to access it if you don't sign up. So please sign up, and we'll see you there.
Yeah, Conscious
really
Collective is one of the supporters for the event. So we just absolutely love what you are doing and the journey you've been on and the work that our time is up, but it's gone so quick. I wanted to delve deep into a lot of other things, but we rest in knowing that what needed to be said and covered was done. So we're excited to support that event, and we'll definitely put more information out to our community the closer it gets.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for being a partner with us. We so appreciate your support.
No problem at all. Nicole, it was really lovely to hear from you. There's so much for me to reflect on what you said, and one of the points that really has stuck with me is this idea of reflective communities, and how important it is to continue to reflect together as teachers, as well as teachers with children, all together, holding ideas lightly, but also allowing it all to come forth. I just think there's so much to that. So thank you so much for everything you guys have shared today.
Thank
And,
you.
you know, our
Yeah,
hearts
thanks
are
for
really,
having
really
us.
with you through this crazy turmoil. And, you know, we stand with love and solidarity to hope that that things work together for the good.
Thank you, Rick.
This is
Rick?
you're a really wonderful host and interviewer, and it's been lovely to spend this time together. So thank you for making space.
Thanks, Nicole.